President Trump was absolutely right to pardon General Michael Flynn. Not only was it within his power to grant compassion, but it was part of his obligation to check and balance excesses of other branches of the government. So 3 cheers for President Trump for pardoning Michael Flynn. You'll hear why on the Dershow. Since the last Dershow, President Trump pardoned his former national security advisor, General Michael Flynn, and he's gotten quite a bit of pushback for it because obviously Flynn was part of the administration and close to the president. Well, I'm here to tell you that President Trump did exactly the right thing. He not only had the power and authority to pardon General Flynn, he should have done it, and he did it. It's part of a very important constitutional power to check and balance excesses in other branches of the government. First, let's get to the power itself. Constitution is as clear as can be. I carry my little Constitution with me all the time. Article 2 gives him, quote, the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. By the way, I used that argument in my argument against impeaching the president, pointing out that the Constitution says the president can pardon all offenses except impeachment, which to me suggests that impeachment has to be based on an offense against the United States. It's kind of negative pregnant of that constitutional provision, but that's an argument for a different time and place. In addition, Article 2 empowers the president, indeed gives him the duty to make sure, quote, he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So when I read the Constitution and I put those provisions together, I come to the following conclusion. The pardon power is not only a power of clemency. It's not only reserved for people on death row, maybe he's old or mentally infirm, let's show a little compassion, let's commute the sentence to life imprisonment, or cases where a person has a large family and he's in for a relatively minor offense. In fact, I helped 2 people get commutations early in the president's term for precisely those reasons. They both got long prison sentences. They had families. The sentences were excessive. Just a show of compassion, In Hebrew, it's called rachmanut or rachmanus. Just show a little mercy. The Bible says justice must you pursue, and some of the commentators interpret that as justice and mercy. One justice is justice that's according to the book. The other justice is justice, which is based on mercy and compassion. So to be sure, that's an important element of the power to pardon and commute, but it's not the most important. The most important aspect of the president's power to pardon and commute is as a check and balance on excesses of the legislative and judicial branches. After all, there are lots of cases where you see a terrible injustice done and there's no remedy in court. There's nothing a court can do about it. They don't have the power to undo the injustice. Where the legislature has caused the injustice and they can't undo it because they've passed a law that has been applied to a particular defendant. In those cases where the legislative and or the executive branch have created an injustice, it's up to the president to check that, to undo that. So the power to pardon and commute is part of our structural separation of powers, part of the structural system of checks and balances. Early in the term, President Trump asked me about a pardon that he was contemplating for somebody, and I gave him my opinion on that pardon. And then I said to him, by the way, Mr. President, the power to pardon is way beyond the power just to grant clemency. It's part of the system of checks and balances. And he really seemed to like that. It put it in context. It took the power of pardon and commutation out of kind of where it had been in England when the king or the queen had the authority to pardon. It put it in the context of the American Constitution. And, the power to pardon was debated in the Constitutional Convention. And so were checks and balances. And I think that a fair reading of the history and a fair reading of the Constitution strongly supports my view, which I've really never seen expressed in writing before. Obviously, I'm going to write about it now that I've thought about it and spoken about it. But I think it's a very important part of the system of checks and balances. So how does that justify the pardon in the General Flynn case? The General Flynn case is a paradigm of a checks and balance situation. Why? Let's remember what Flynn did and what he was accused of. During the transition period, General Flynn, who knew he was going to be in the government dealing with national security issues, met with an ambassador, a diplomat from Russia, a man named Kislyak. And they discussed some things, including trying to persuade the Russians not to go along with President Obama's harebrained act of revenge toward the end of his administration to condemn Israel at the Security Council of the UN for actually having control over the Western Wall, the Jewish Quarter, and the access roads to Hebrew University and Hadassah, central aspects of Israel and Jewish life. And Obama, in just revenge against Netanyahu, decided to engineer that resolution. The United States could have vetoed it. They always used to veto resolutions like that that were one-sided. It was about Israel continuing its occupation on the West Bank, something it offered to end in 2000, 2001, 2008. It ended its occupation of Gaza in 2005. It was a typical one-sided UN Security Council resolution. And the Trump administration didn't want to be burdened with it when they came into office. They had bigger and better ideas, such as the Abraham Accords and trying to make peace with the Palestinians. So they didn't want a lame duck outgoing president a month before his presidency ends to engineer a resolution that would make peace more difficult. Perfectly reasonable. Now, technically, any citizen meeting with a diplomat from another country is violating what's called the Logan Act. The Logan Act was passed 200 and something years ago, and it is designed to prevent private citizens from negotiating with foreign powers. It has never been successfully used. The last time it was used at all was against some farmer in Pennsylvania or something at the beginning of the 19th century. It's a dead letter. There is a legal concept called desuetude, fancy term. All it means is if a criminal statute, has been lying dormant for dozens and dozens of years, in this case, 200 years, it no longer has the force of law. So nobody has been prosecuted, but I'm not sure Flynn was aware of that, and he obviously wasn't anxious to admit that he had these conversations. And the FBI knew that. They understood that. And so they invited him to a perjury trap. What does that mean? They invited him to have a conversation. Well, you don't need your lawyer. Just, we want to talk to you about a few things. What do you need a lawyer for? Just come sit. We're schmoozing. Come on. We're just schmoozing. Just, two folks. We're FBI. You're national security. Let's just have a little conversation. But, of course, lying to the FBI under certain circumstances is a federal felony. And so by having that conversation without his lawyer present in a very informal way, they were inviting him to do one of two things. They were going to ask him about whether he met with a Russian diplomat. And so we had two choices: to admit something that was technically a crime, violation of the Logan Act, even though it wasn't enforceable, it was still technically a crime, or to deny it, in which case he would be lying, and it's a crime to lie to FBI agents. It shouldn't be a crime to lie to FBI agents or prosecutors because it's too easy to entrap people. Remember Martha Stewart? She was ultimately prosecuted and sent to jail, not for insider trading, but for lying about it to the prosecutors. So that's a favorite prosecutorial tool. And by the way, if you're ever called to talk to the FBI, get a lawyer. Don't go. They're not your friends. You don't schmooze with the FBI. You prepare for the investigation. You have your lawyer there with you. He objects to questions that are improper or too broad, and he advises you. Also, obviously don't lie and don't commit crimes. I'm not here advising anybody to do that. I'm not suggesting that Flynn did the right thing. When he was asked directly, did you meet with the diplomat? And he said no, he lied. That's on him. I'm not going to defend him against the accusation that he lied, the moral accusation that he lied. But, and this may surprise you, he didn't commit a crime. What? He lied to the FBI? I just told you lying to the FBI is a crime. Why didn't he commit a crime? I said under certain circumstances. And one of the circumstances, according to the statute is that the lie has to be, quote, material to the investigation. It has to be relevant to the investigation. It has to be something that hinders the investigation if you lie. Now, how can this be material to the investigation? The FBI had taped his meeting with the diplomat. They had him on tape, every word, talking to the diplomat. So when they asked him, did you speak to the diplomat? They knew the answer to that question. And they knew he would probably lie because he didn't want to admit having violated the Logan Act. He fell into the trap easily, and he did lie about it. Maybe that was a good reason for dismissing him from his job. He then apparently lied to the vice president when the vice president asked him about it, and he was fired. Okay, that's different from being prosecuted. So then he was indicted, and his family was threatened. He was told that members of his family would be prosecuted as well for who knows what. The FBI, government prosecutors can find crimes if they look hard enough. They were also threatening to take away his home and a range of other things, and so he ultimately decided to plead guilty, and he did. But then when he was thinking about it, when he heard people comment about it, I was one of those who commented about it, I wrote articles and spoke out saying he should never have pleaded guilty. He didn't commit a crime. And I did my analysis that he didn't commit a crime. So he then went and tried to withdraw his guilty plea. And normally you're allowed to withdraw a guilty plea under circumstances like that. But then the Justice Department came in and said, we've done an investigation of this case too, and we kind of agree with Dershowitz. We kind of agree with the critics. It wasn't material, and we're not thrilled about how the FBI handled the threats against him. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to exercise our discretion under the Constitution, and we're going to drop all the charges against him, and he's a free man. Well, enter Judge Sullivan, a Budinsky judge in the D.C. Circuit, generally a good judge, but very much an activist, very much a judicial activist. And he said, well, I'm not happy with him going free. I'm not happy with him withdrawing his guilty plea. I'm not happy with the government dropping the charges. So I'm going to conduct an investigation into whether the Justice Department did the right thing. In fact, I'm going to appoint my own lawyer, a former judge from New York, to investigate this. A judge appointing his own lawyer to investigate? Then the lawyer for General Flynn took that on appeal and won and then lost, and it was a mess. The case was back in Judge Sullivan's chambers. He was going to have this political circus because the judge had already, the other judge who was appointed to be his lawyer, the judge's lawyer wrote a brief attacking the Justice Department. So it was going to be a political circus. And injustice was rife because, A, he never should have been prosecuted, Flynn. B, he should have been allowed to withdraw his guilty plea. C, the federal government should have been allowed to drop the case. None of that had happened. So there you have a perfect situation where you have legislative overreaching, the Logan Act. The Logan Act is almost certainly unconstitutional. How can you stop a citizen from talking to a person in a foreign country? So the Logan Act itself, legislative overreach. Then you get prosecutorial overreach, prosecuting somebody for something that isn't a crime and threatening him. And then you get judicial overreach, judges conducting a political circus instead of doing their job. Their job is simply to decide cases and controversies. And when you have the government and the defendant both agreeing to drop the case, there's no case in controversy. So the Budinsky judge should not have had the power to convene hearings. So it's an example, a perfect example of where the judiciary did wrong, the legislature did wrong, and the prosecution did wrong. And who is the only person who can check and balance all that wrongdoing? The President of the United States through his pardon power. So the President acted not only perfectly properly, but in a positive and good way by doing what the judge should have allowed the prosecution, the Justice Department to do, drop the case. So Flynn is now a free man. Will they try to go after him for state charges? I doubt there are any state charges, but you never are totally free once you've been convicted of a crime. But legally, in terms of the federal government, he's now completely free. Well, the president pardoned the turkey as well on Thanksgiving. That's a symbolic act. And the media is reporting that he's going to issue other pardons and commutations. I hope so. I'm representing a couple of people, a number of people, clients who I've represented for a long time. And every lawyer, when you lose in court or when other lawyers lose in court, you always try to get a pardon and a commutation. And I'm trying to get pardons and commutations for my clients, as many lawyers I know are trying to do. And so, I do have a dog in this fight, as many lawyers do as well. So I'm hoping the president uses his pardon power broadly and consistently with checks and balances. Let me give you another example of an area where the president could and should use his pardon power. I've talked on the show before about the trial penalty. So there's a case now pending in front of the president where two white-collar defendants were offered pleas in the range of 7 years if they pleaded guilty to some security-type crimes. But they didn't believe they were guilty, and so they went to trial, and they lost. They were convicted. And instead of getting the 7-year sentence they were offered, they got sentences in excess of 70 years, a tenfold increase. Now, what does a 70 or 75, in one case, I think an 80-year sentence, represent for somebody who was offered a 7-year sentence if he pleaded? Well, what it really means is the person got 7 years for the crime. That's what the government thought the crime was worth, 7 years. If you plead, you get 7 years. And then he got 70 more years or more for the additional crime of exercising their constitutional right to trial by jury under the Bill of Rights. That can't be right. You shouldn't be able to be punished for exercising your constitutional right. Imagine if you could be punished or fined for voting or not voting. You can't punish people for exercising their constitutional rights. And that's what the trial penalty is. And so the president is being asked to commute the sentences of people who have been victims of the trial penalty to what they would have gotten had they not gone to trial, what the appropriate punishment should be. Again, a perfect check on the excesses of the legislature for having much too harsh penalties for some of these crimes, and of the judiciary for tolerating the trial penalty that's imposed by prosecutors. A perfect example of how the president can serve as a check and balance. The president can also serve as a check and balance just on excessive sentences. Since I started practicing law almost 60 years ago, a zero has been added to many nonviolent criminal sentences. What used to get you 1 gets you 10. What used to get you 2 gets you 20. What used to get you 3 gets you 30. There's something unconscionable about that. We have some of the longest sentences of any Western democracy. We have more people in prison per capita and in absolute terms than any Western democracy. And the president has a role to play. Now, he should play it across the board. I have to tell you, I'm not happy about the president or this Justice Department trying to rush through death sentences that are now pending for federal prisoners because they know that President-elect, presumptive President-elect, soon to be President-elect Biden, has said he's opposed to the death penalty and might conceivably commute the death penalty of the 4 people, federal prisoners that are now on death row. So the Justice Department, according to press reports, is now trying to rush the execution of these 4 so that they don't get the benefit of presidential clemency from the next president. I certainly don't approve of that. The commutation and pardon power should be exercised both with compassion and broadly. Now, I have no brief for any of the people who are currently on death row. They committed horrible, heinous, violent crimes, and that's different from what I've been talking about, which is kind of non-violent crimes. But I think you have to put the whole thing in the context of the pardon power. So President Trump did the right thing. Pardoning Flynn was absolutely the right thing. He not only had the power to do it, he was right to do it. He would be right to try to check and balance the trial penalty where people get excessive sentences for pleading not guilty. There are other areas as well. For example, there are certain crimes that were crimes when the person was convicted, but the same acts are no longer crimes. When Prohibition was repealed in 1933, President Roosevelt did exercise executive clemency for people who were in prison. There's a great cartoon from the New Yorker some years ago where the devil is talking to God, and the devil says, "Well, now, God, what do we do with all these Catholic sinners who are down here for eating meat on Friday?" This is after the Catholic Church loosened up its rules about eating meat on Friday. So what happens if you change the law? Should the person still be serving his sentence? Well, that's a perfect instance for commutation or pardon. So 3 cheers, 3 loud cheers, bravo, 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 to President Trump for pardoning Flynn, and I hope there'll be more cheers for more pardons. It's a power that should be exercised broadly, fairly, equally, not just for people the president knows or served in his administration, but for anybody who fits into the criteria of an unfair conviction or an unfair sentence that's not remediable by the other branches of government. Checks and balances is a crucial and central part of our system of justice, and the power to pardon and commute is an important part of our system of checks and balances. I know you have a lot of calls today because I asked you for my advice. I asked you for my advice as to whether or not I should nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize for the incredible actions done by his administration to bring Israel, the United Emirates, and Bahrain and Sudan into a normal relationship. So, and I know you have calls on other subjects as well, so let's turn to my favorite part of the show, your calls. Our first call today is from Dave.
Hi, Mr. Dershowitz. Yes, you should nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, thanks. That's a vote. Okay. Do we have any votes on the other side of the issue?
Number 1, Trump's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and prances out upon the stage and then is heard no more. His autobiography is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And then my take on an old English nursery rhyme. Sing a song of suckpence, a pocket full of lie, 4 and 20 BS ideas, which only MAGAs buy. When the lie was exposed, on top we took a dump. Wasn't this an appropriate dish to serve real Donald Trump?
All right. Well, I told you I wanted some diversity from the callers. I didn't want all pro-Trump conservative Republicans. We surely got a very strong anti-Trump call. Let's assume, for purposes of this argument, let's assume without agreeing that everything you said is correct. How is that an argument about not giving him the Peace Prize? The Peace Prize was given, as I said, to Arafat, to Anwar Sadat, to Henry Kissinger. People could write poems like that about any of those very, very controversial leaders. The prize is not for what kind of a person you are. The prize is for what you've done during the past year to promote peace between nations, reduce the risks of war, and to promote peace conferences, all of which President Trump did. So I appreciate your vote on this issue. And now let's turn to our next caller and see what he or she has to say.
So a friend sent me your Twitter question about nominating President Trump for the Abraham Accord. And personally, I'm surprised that you would even ask the question. For me, I think it should be a given that he should be nominated and that he should be seated. I think his efforts are truly outstanding, and nothing like we've seen in the past. This is certainly monumental, a wonderful peace agreement that no one else has been able to achieve. So, of course, I'm all for his nomination, and I pray for his getting that, receiving that. He's earned it.
Well, I agree. I think he's earned it. I doubt he'll get it. I do think the Nobel Peace Prize Committee has been kind of political in nature and not willing to give the prize to people who are on the right and who are perceived as many perceive President Trump. But that's not an argument against making the nomination. That's just a prediction of what is likely to happen. I have nominated several people for the Nobel Peace Prize in the past. Two of them have won it. I was one of those who nominated Elie Wiesel. And I was one of those who nominated an organization, a peace organization. I've also nominated Irwin Cotler over the years, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, who's now just been appointed to some very important job commemorating the Holocaust. He's done great work for peace, and he hasn't gotten it. So, win some, lose some. I'm going to do it if I believe it's right as a matter of principle, without concern for what the results are likely to be. Again, thanks for all of your votes and your answers. Our next call is from New Mexico. Ron, what do you have to say?
No, of course not, because the discussions didn't even include the Palestinians, as tough as they are to get to the table and as many times as they've rejected it in the past is irrelevant. Without them, nothing's been done. And as it's been said, revenge is a dish best served cold, I believe is the expression. We don't know anything except that we've done something without including the key player. Of course, you shouldn't be nominating him. The whole idea of it's a joke.
Well, I disagree. I think he did include the Palestinians. He made them an incredible offer. I know because I consulted on the Trump peace plan. It offered the Palestinians essentially a state, a contiguous state, a state which could thrive, billions and billions of dollars of Marshall Plan type aid. The Palestinians simply rejected the plan, didn't even come to the conference in which the plan, the economic aspects of the plan were discussed. The Palestinians have always been included in 2000, 2001, 2005, 2008, and most recently. But, you can't make somebody come to the bargaining table. Palestinians will never get a state through the BDS, boycott movement against Israel. They won't get a state through UN resolutions. They'll only get a state if they sit down and negotiate with Israel, which the Israelis have offered them. So I don't see that making peace between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and the Sudan and Bahrain should be excluded from a Nobel Prize because the Palestinians haven't been willing to make peace or normalize relationships with Israel. I think what this plan, this normalization does is it doesn't exclude the Palestinians from future negotiations, but it says to them, look, you don't have a veto. As you put it in your question, nothing gets done without the Palestinians. Well, this got done without the Palestinians, and I think that's a good thing. And so that, to me, is not a decisive argument against nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Our next call is from a foreign country, France.
I just read your post on Twitter regarding the Nobel Peace Prize for Trump, and I really agree. It would be wonderful. I mean, well, first, I'm a big fan about on your books. They are really amazing, and well, what you have done regarding Middle East and Israel, it's really amazing. So, yes, please, it would be great if you can nominate it.
I appreciate that. And I think the important thing, too, is you don't have to be a supporter of somebody to nominate them for the Peace Prize. As you all know, I was a strong supporter of Hillary Clinton. I voted for her, campaigned for her, contributed to her. There are many parts of the Trump administration I disagreed with: his immigration policy, his health care policy, his tax policy, his policy toward guns, his policy toward the environment. I would not propose President Trump for awards in any of those areas, but that's not what the Peace Prize is about. The Peace Prize is for somebody who you may not like, you may not support, but who singularly contributed to peace and brotherhood, or whatever the term is, fraternity, all, I guess, sexist terms because they're in the masculine, but friendship between previously warring parties, reducing the risk of war, and having peace conferences. And under those criteria, I think it's inescapable that the Abraham Accords has to be the event. And then the only question is who, within the context of the Abraham Accords, gets the prize. And on any list, it's hard to exclude President Trump. The list either should be the leaders of the countries, Trump's one of them, or it should be the people within the Trump administration who helped bring this about. I guess there's an argument. There was one diplomat recently who did nominate Netanyahu and the emirs for the Peace Prize and left out Trump or anybody in the Trump administration. That seems like a willful, deliberate omission. I don't think these accords would have come about without the intervention of the Trump administration. If people have a different view on that, I'd be interested in hearing it. But I'm still not persuaded that President Trump doesn't deserve a share of the prize, whatever else you might think about his policies or his actions in other areas. Okay, let's hear from our next caller.
So you want to nominate Donald J. Trump as a Nobel Peace Prize. He is single-handedly, well, not single-handedly, but he killed 260,000 Americans. And you want a Peace Prize for him? Get out from your own crap. Alan, you're on the wrong side of history, and you destroyed yourself, and you destroyed your career by your association with this guy. This is what you did. You did this.
Well, I'm not nominating myself for any prizes. You have perfect right to have your opinion about me. I don't think I associated myself with any administration. I opposed many of his views. Also, I was very critical of his not wearing a mask and some of his approaches to the pandemic. I don't believe he is responsible for the deaths of so many people during the pandemic. Many other countries in the world had massive death tolls and sickness tolls. Could he have done more? Could everybody have done more? Could Governor Cuomo have done more? Could Governor, you name them, have done more? In retrospect, I think everybody could have done more. But again, that has nothing to do with the Peace Prize. Let's assume hypothetically that you agree that he didn't do a good job on the pandemic. That has nothing to do with peace or war. Yes, it has to do with life and death, but you have to separate life and death caused by pandemics from life and death caused by war. No, he doesn't get the Nobel Prize for medicine. That's clear. But the Peace Prize is specifically designated for people who meet the three criteria, and I think he meets the three criteria. As far as my reputation is concerned, I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud of the fact that I stood up on the floor of the Senate and opposed an unconstitutional impeachment based on criteria that are not in the Constitution. I'm glad that I helped draft some aspects of the peace plan, that I helped to support his policies with regard to stopping anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism on campus. So, I have a mixed view of the Trump administration, as I have a mixed view of the Obama administration and of the administrations that precede that. And I'm sure I'm going to have a mixed view of the next administration. I'm going to offer my services, obviously, to the incoming president of the United States on the Middle East, and those who will disagree with his policies will probably fault me for doing that. But as an American patriot and an academic, I often offer my services. Sometimes they're accepted, sometimes they're not, to any president, particularly in areas where I think I can do some good and where I can help them do some good. So thanks for your call, but don't agree. So let's hear from our next caller.
Yes, I was hoping your tweet about nominating Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize was a joke, or someone had hacked your Twitter account. The guy who has spent the last few weeks trying to overturn the results of an election, who has gone golfing while 260,000 Americans are dead. Let's see, who has pardoned his co-conspirators. Where do I begin? You think that man deserves to be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize? What is wrong with you? And what does he have on you? Stop disgracing yourself, please. He lost.
Well, let me be very clear that neither he nor anybody else has anything on me. I express my views based on principle. I'd be curious what you, the callers who are opposed to him getting the Peace Prize, would have said about Yasser Arafat getting the Peace Prize, or Anwar Sadat, or Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger is a perfect example. He was called a war criminal. I don't agree with that. But he was called a war criminal for his role in the bombing of Cambodia and other actions taken during the Vietnam War. I was a strong opponent of the Vietnam War. I marched against it. I represented students who were being drafted and being selectively drafted. I represented students who were being prosecuted for their opposition to the war. But I would have supported, I think I did support, it's a long time ago, the Peace Prize for Henry Kissinger, because he did help bring about a ceasefire and end of hostilities between the United States and North Vietnam. So again, it's not a prize for being a good president. It's not a prize for even being a good person. It's a prize for satisfying the narrow criteria that Alfred Nobel put in his will for getting the Peace Prize. So I still think I haven't heard persuasive arguments other than ad hominem arguments against me nominating him for the Peace Prize. The fact that it will hurt my career, hurt my reputation, is obviously irrelevant to me. If it's the right thing to do, I'm going to do it. Our next call is from New Jersey.
And I just saw your tweet about whether you should be nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in the Middle East and the Abraham Accords. I am a supporter of that, and I'll put it mildly that this president is the best president that we've ever seen in our lifetime. And he needs to be reelected. The election was stolen from him, and I have no doubt, with the faith of God, that he will be continuing on as the president of the United States. And I hope that people in this world, in this country, realize what a gift he is to all of us.
So what's happening now is the calls are really not about whether he should get the Peace Prize. The calls are whether or not he's a good president. And that's not relevant to whether he ought to get the Peace Prize. What's relevant is whether he meets the criteria. It's interesting that most of the callers have said that they're calling because they read my tweet, not that they listened to the show. I think if they had listened to the whole show, they would have heard a more nuanced discussion of the pros and cons of the Peace Prize and the criteria for the Peace Prize. I welcome people reading my tweets and calling in, but my preference is to get people who have actually seen the show. When you read the tweet's an invitation to watch the show and subscribe to it. Listen to what I have to say, not just the 26 or whatever letters that appear in a tweet. We live in a world of tweets, unfortunately, and part of the reason I have this show is to get out from the world of tweets and into the world of at least 20 or 25 minutes of serious, rational discussion followed by questions and answers. So please, if you've read my tweets, please watch the show and listen to the show and then ask me questions based on what I actually said in the show rather than what appears in the tweets. But, read the tweets as well. That's part of what I say, and I stand by everything I say. Okay, thanks for your call. Our next call is from California. Michael?
And yes, you should nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Look what he's done in the Middle East, the most peaceful in my lifetime, 50 years.
Well, that call is very much on point. He has done a great deal of positive good in the Middle East. I think that's absolutely right. And no matter how strongly I supported his opponent in 2016, Hillary Clinton, I'm going to recognize his achievements. And no matter how strongly I supported Barack Obama, I'm going to condemn his failures. That's what all Americans should do. We shouldn't take sides and say, anything the person we voted for is good and everything the person we voted against is bad. We should evaluate every action by every president and every public official based on the merits and demerits of what they've done. And that's what I'm going to continue to do on the Dershow. So here's my message to my old friend Joe Biden, who I really like. I'm watching you. I'm going to be critical when I think you deserve criticism. I'm going to be positive when I think you deserve praise. But you're not getting a pass. Nobody gets a pass in America. Our system of checks and balances not only applies to the president checking the legislature, the judiciary checking the president, etc. It also applies to the media and to every American. We get to check and balance against our elected officials by our vote, by our comments, by our op-eds, by our statements, and part of the function of the Dershow is to serve as part of that system of outside, extra-governmental checks and balances. Our next call is from Lindy in Utah.
Absolutely, you should nominate Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. I am just personally so very grateful for the work that he has done to bring these countries together.
Again, that's a very relevant call. That's what he's done. He's helped bring these countries together. Look, he has stood on the back of other people who came before him, no question. Efforts have been made in the past to try to bring these countries and other countries together. The Nobel Peace Prize was given to Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin and others for the Oslo Accords back in 1993, and but those didn't succeed. This one has succeeded. Will it hold together? Who knows? If you see the video that's circulating online of an Israeli at the food market in the United Arab Emirates with Israeli flags next to United Emirates flags, with Israeli products being displayed in the front of the store with an Israeli flag, you see this looks like a warm peace rather than merely a cold peace. So, the prize is for successfully creating relationships between previously warring countries, not only warring militarily, but warring diplomatically and in other ways. And so by those criteria, it seems to be a strong case for the prize being accorded to a group of people, including President Trump. Our last call today is from Mark in New Jersey.
Yeah, hi, Professor. There's been a lot of talk about presidential pardons lately, including the president's recent pardon of Michael Flynn, who twice pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Our Supreme Court has inscribed on it the principle of equal justice under law, but to me, the pardon power feels completely antithetical to that important democratic principle. I believe that pardoning somebody who's been convicted of a crime smacks of favoritism and political cronyism. While I understand that its use may be justified in the most extenuating circumstances, I strongly believe that it should be used sparingly and in cases where there has been a great legal injustice committed. Do you believe that pardoning somebody who's been convicted of a crime is contrary to that principle that people should be held accountable for their criminal acts? Thank you for your comments.
It's a great question. Of course, it anticipated what the show was about today. I do believe the pardon power should be used broadly, not sparingly, and should be used to undo injustices, and particularly injustices that are not subject to being remedied by the other branches of government. It should also serve as a check and balance. I do agree with you that it should be applied equally. It shouldn't be limited to cronies, friends, former associates of the president or of other people in power, and the Trump pardons have not done that. He has pardoned Democrats and Republicans. He has pardoned people or commuted people he never heard of. The two cases that I brought to his attention early in his administration involved a rabbi from Brooklyn who was given a very, very long sentence for something that most people get very short sentences for, somewhere in the middle of Iowa, with hints of anti-Semitism in the case. And the other one involved a man who was selling a product which he believed was legal, an analog to marijuana, and he too got a very, very long sentence. His wife was suffering from cancer and he had multiple children. The president didn't know these people. He just felt sympathy and compassion for them, and that's a very important part of the pardon power as well. So people should be held accountable for their crimes, and when people have their sentences commuted, they're still held accountable. They still are convicted felons. When they are pardoned, they still go down in history as somebody who has been convicted and pardoned, but you're right, the entire conviction is wiped out. And so it should be reserved for cases of injustice. I agree with you, but there's a lot of injustice in this country. We have a very imperfect criminal justice system, and I think the president can play a very important role in checking and balancing the excesses of our judicial and legislative branches when it comes to criminal justice. I love our country, and I think our country has some of the best systems in place for many in many areas. Criminal justice is not one of them. We are not the best country in the world when it comes to criminal justice. What Churchill said about democracy and what I often say about freedom of speech, the worst possible system except for all the others that have been tried over time, I cannot in good conscience say that about our criminal justice system. It is not the best except for all the others. There are other systems of justice in the world that are better than ours. And I think that a president can help improve the system by using the pardon and commutation power wisely, broadly, and in the interests of justice. Hey, great calls. I invited you to call me and give me your opinions. I got a diversity of opinions today. Got a lot of pro-Trump people, a lot of anti-Trump people, and a lot of people who just want to do the right thing when it comes to the Nobel Peace Prize and pardons. So again, the Dershow is incomplete without the wits. The wits is provided by my viewers and listeners. Keep calling, read the tweets, but watch the show, listen to the show, subscribe to the show, and then your calls will be based more on what I say broadly and generally than what I tweet in the few words that Twitter allows me. So I'm looking forward to your questions on the next Dershow. Please call 24/7. The number is 216-710-0050. Keep your comments short and to the point. Again, the number for you to call 24/7 is 216-710-0050. Hard questions, criticisms, everything's fine. Just keep your questions short, and I'll answer them all on the Dershow.